Welcome back to another study of Watching Jesus Serve. In this study, all we're doing is going back to the Gospels, taking it easy for a minute, and just watching Jesus do what he does best, which is serve other people. And in this process, we're going to see three things. He's going to touch those who seem untouchable. He's going to fix backwards ways of thinking, and he's going to set the example for us even in 2021. Last week, we talked about how Jesus dealt with children, and that was kind of a marginalized group that was looked upon by adults and certainly by Jesus' disciples. But last week, we talked about how Jesus corrected his disciples' backwards thinking and instead insisted the children come to him, and in fact, those were the kind of people that he wants in the kingdom of heaven. And this week, we're going to talk about a similarly marginalized group, talking about Jesus and how he dealt with women from Mark chapter 5. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. Now, this is a story that's often overlooked, and maybe because it's in the middle of another story that Jesus is going to heal somebody else, and this woman happened to be on his way there, or it could be because it's kind of an awkward conversation for us to have. I don't really think that anyone wants to preach this story from the pulpit because it's very sensitive, and it's a very personal kind of issue. But that's exactly why we want to talk about this in our study, because if it's in the Bible and Jesus took time to deal with this woman, then we need to be watching him do that. Obviously, this would have been a very private, personal matter for this woman. And this wasn't just a regular health concern or maybe a little bit of irregularity in her cycle. This would have been a problem that was a major concern for her. She'd been dealing with it for 12 years. And besides all the embarrassment and possible shame that she would have felt because of her condition, there was another layer on top of this situation in that, according to Jewish law, she would have been ceremonially unclean. As a matter of fact, Leviticus 15 has an entire section on how the Jews are supposed to handle this kind of situation. And as you read through that text in Leviticus 15, one theme stands out among the rest, which is if this is your situation, then you are ceremonially unclean. And typically, that wouldn't have been a problem for women because they were used to that every month and they knew what to do and knew what to expect. But this woman had a constant issue with this for 12 whole years. And it wasn't just Jewish law that had a lot to say about that back in antiquity. As a matter of fact, Greeks had a lot to say about this kind of thing. And some went so far as to say that a woman in this situation shouldn't even be looked upon, they shouldn't be approached, and they shouldn't be touched. And one influential teacher back at around the time of Jesus even said this, and I'm quoting him here, "Her breath is harmful and her gaze is detrimental." So it wasn't just the Jewish people who had very strict laws and ideas about this situation. People back in antiquity just had kind of messed up backwards thinking about women during this time. And what's worse than the social and legal limitations put on this woman, what was harmful was that she was going from doctor to doctor trying to figure out what was wrong with her. And the Bible says that she was spending a lot of money trying to fix this issue, and it really made her become poor. She had spent everything trying to figure this out. And back during this time, they didn't really have modern medicine like we do. Now we have answers and solutions to all kinds of medical issues, and we rarely come upon an issue that we need some kind of special help with. But back in Jesus' time, they had ointments, they had lotions, but mostly it was a bunch of religious nonsense. They would chant things and they would rub things on their bodies, and they're kind of shooting in the dark. We don't really know how to fix the situation. And if you want to learn more about that, we're going to leave a link to an article in the description below that you can read more about it. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of this woman back in Jesus' time. She is ceremonially unclean, which means a few things. She cannot participate in temple worship because if you were lame, if you were blind, if you were paralyzed, all those things the Old Testament stipulated, you had to stay away from the temple because it implied some kind of sickness about you. And this woman was linked in to that category. So she couldn't go to the temple for at least 12 years. She could not be touched. It was not appropriate for her to be approached or dealt with. So imagine if she was married, or imagine if she had children. So for that long, if she wanted to hug or kiss her spouse, then that made her spouse ceremonially unclean, and he had to go through purification rites to be made clean, that he can go out in public again. So this woman's life was consumed by this one issue she's been having for 12 years. And you get the sense when you read about this woman that she's kind of at the end of her rope. What else can she do? She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I even touch his garments, I'll be made well." So this woman, having nowhere else to turn, she's been to physicians, she's done probably everything that she can do to help fix this problem. And so she hears about this rabbi who's coming into town, who's healed the sick, and he's made paralyzed people walk. And she thinks, this probably is my last shot. I've tried everything else. I have to at least go try to at least touch him or be around him. Maybe I can get healed. And the Bible paints a picture that people were pressing around Jesus, which means the crowd was heavy on him and everyone was talking to him. And it seems like kind of an overwhelming scene. But here's the lady's strategy. As everyone else is distracted, I'm going to sneak up behind Jesus or around him. And if I can just touch his cloak, the outer garment of what he's wearing, then maybe I can be healed. And this would have been extremely frowned upon for a few reasons. Number one, obviously, she was ceremonially unclean. So if she, as an unclean individual, touched Jesus, then Jesus himself would be made unclean because of the potential blood to skin contact going on. Number two, in Jewish society, men and women were not really supposed to touch each other unless they were married. And even then in public, if married people were touching each other, a man and a woman touched each other really at all in public, it was extremely frowned upon. It was scandalous and frivolous, and it would have made people really uncomfortable. And number three, some rabbis in Jesus' time taught that a man should not be left alone with a woman. And some went so far as to say, if you find yourself alone with a woman, then to avoid temptation, and the implication is for her to tempt you, then you, as a pious male, should run away, drawing attention to yourself. You should run far from this woman as to remove that temptation from yourself. So in any way you looked, the idea of this woman touching Jesus, especially in public, really at all, was very much frowned upon. So she's trying to do it secretly. She's hoping right now, if I can just touch him and get away really quickly, no harm, no foul, no one will know what's going on. And this idea of holy men's garments actually appears a lot in the Bible. And people believed back then that if a prophet was wearing a coat, or if he touched something, that somehow that made that holy and you could pass the gift of the Holy Spirit on through that. And we get that example like with people like Elijah, who tosses his coat onto Elisha. So one holy man, a prophet, tosses his coat onto Elisha. But in the New Testament, there's also a couple examples, as in Acts chapter 19. And God was doing extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul, so that even handkerchiefs and aprons that had touched his skin were carried away to the sick, and their diseases left them, the evil spirits came out of them. So that's this lady's idea. I don't have to make a big scene. I don't even have to be seen, or people can see my face so they don't have to recognize me that I'm out in public. If I can just get in and out quickly, then maybe this can solve my problem forever. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." So when the lady goes to try and touch Jesus' coat, things don't go according to her plan, because she wants to get in and out quickly, but what happens is Jesus feels somehow that power is escaping through him, and he remarks, "Who touched me?" So when Jesus calls her out, she would have been mortified, because people in this community probably knew what she was dealing with, probably knew that she was ceremonially unclean and going to ask, "Why are you outside? What are you doing? This is a rabbi coming to town. Why are you defiling him like that?" And you get the sense also Jesus' own disciples are going to reprimand her because of what we talked about in the last class. If kids can't come up and receive a blessing, then surely this defiled woman can't receive a blessing. And you get the sense that she is ready to be scolded. You get the sense that she is just at the end of her rope. And so she falls down and confesses everything that's going on with her. And she's basically begging for Jesus not to make this a problem. She's begging for mercy. And it would have been a touching scene. So the idea is, what is Jesus going to do here? How is he going to respond? And everyone in the crowd and people who are reading this later on would have thought he's going to scold her. Like, there's no other way. Like, he, as a good, pious rabbi who probably thought like the other rabbis of his time, there's no way he's going to be okay with this. But Jesus, again, flips that mindset for his disciples to see. And so instead of scolding her, he commends her faith and he lets her go and says, this was a good thing that you've done, which would have blown everyone's expectations out of the water. But that's a theme in Jesus' ministry if you haven't picked up on it yet. When someone comes to him, there's that sense of, what are you doing? Why are you out here? Especially lepers or people who have been paralyzed. What are you doing? We don't have time. Why are you here? And every single time, Jesus commends someone for their faith. And instead of being reprimanded by his disciples, what Jesus says is, you've done a good thing. Your faith has made you well. And he says the same thing to this woman as well. And again, the reason we want to talk about this story is because these kinds of issues are usually difficult for us to talk about, and they're sensitive. And just imagine, if it's sensitive for us to read and talk about, imagine how the woman in real life would have felt. I mean, it was embarrassing. It was probably humiliating. Other people didn't have that problem. She may have been outcast. So imagine how she would have felt from day to day. It would have been humiliating. She probably would have felt like giving up. And as people, Christians or otherwise, sometimes difficult and sensitive issues like this make us hesitate. It's easier to talk to someone who might just be doing some wrong things, like they're not living the kind of life that they're supposed to, or they've just been away from church for a while. And those things are easier to talk about than someone who has like a major issue that we don't know even how to bring up the conversations. Ours might be different issues, but we all have those issues that make us hesitate and kind of shirk back and not really sure how to handle those things. But imagine how this woman would have felt being validated and actually rewarded for her faith. After years of going from doctor to doctor and trying miracle cure and being depressed about her situation and almost accepting that's just who she is and what she's going to have to deal with, imagine how it would have felt that she was cared for, her issue was taken care of, and that she was rewarded and she was accepted for showing her faith. And now imagine how people in the 21st century feel with some of these kinds of issues. And they're different for everybody, but they're the kinds of issues that make people feel like there is no way I can go back in society. There's no way I can go into this community, or there's no way I can go back into church after this. They probably feel isolated, and they probably felt unheard. And there's no way that anyone's going to validate me with this situation. And so when we find those people in our lives, we must do the same thing that Jesus did. And we might not be able to give them our jacket and say, touch my jacket, and then your issue will be resolved. But here's one thing we can do. Jesus normalized her. He didn't make it a big deal that she was there. He treated her with love and respect. He gave her some attention that she probably had not had in years. We can do the exact same thing. So as we close, I want to ask you, who is the person in your life who's dealing with something that's very sensitive, that's a very controversial issue, and you might want to talk to them, but you don't even know how to begin that conversation? Who is that person in your life? What we can learn from Jesus in this situation is that the least we can do is go to them and show them that we do acknowledge them. We do see them. Maybe we can't help them physically like Jesus healed that woman, but the least we can do is show them divine love and mercy, and the same kind of love and mercy that Jesus extended to us. And the more we do that, watching Jesus' example, the better disciples we're going to be. Hey, you're still here. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for watching our video. If you like what you saw, there's plenty more where that came from. Check out our YouTube channel and the various series and videos we've done, and let us know what you'd like to see further.